Hello, I'm Stephen Bishop, your instructor for Psychology 110, and today's lesson is going to be on romantic attraction. What do you look for in a romantic partner? If you were reading a Craigslist ad, would you be more attracted to the one that says, lonely person, sensitive, fun, music and animal lover, looking for someone to love? How sweet. Would you be more attracted to the one that said, wild animal, loves drugs, sex, and rock and roll? No commitments, just looking for a good time. Psychological researchers have studied what actually turns us on and what attracts us. And would you believe some research has shown that you are most attracted to someone who looks like your opposite sex parent? Or maybe even looks and acts like you. Frawley and Marks did a study where they flashed pictures of strangers in front of subjects and had them rate the attractiveness of the subjects. Unbeknownst to the subjects, they slipped in pictures of their opposite sex parent. Now, the pictures flashed in front of their eyes so fast, they didn't have a chance to recognize anybody, but they just had to quickly rate how attractive the person was. Most people rated the picture of their opposite sex parents as sexually attractive. What about yourself? Other researchers have shown that we actually are attracted to people who look a lot like us. They have the same facial shape, same facial features. One of the reasons for this is we look at ourselves in the mirror day after day. Anything that we become very familiar with, we become more attracted to. So we're very familiar with our look, so we find other people who look similar to us attractive. That even goes for our voice. You might think that you hate to hear your voice. A study was done in which they played short snippets of a person's voice, and in that series of strange voices, they put the person's own voice. They didn't recognize their own voice because we typically don't unless we know it's us. But those people rated their own voice as being sexually attractive. Another theory of what causes us to be attracted to somebody is the evolutionary theory. According to evolutionary theory, we are attracted to somebody because they are more likely to pass on our genes. So it's a good gene theory. But we don't go around looking at people and think, oh, they look like they have good genes. They'll help me pass on my genes. But we look at their physical features, and that tells us whether they're healthy. One thing that we look at is a person's face. So the symmetry of their face. If you look at the two men on the right of the screen, you see one has a very asymmetrical face. Most people will look at him and say, not very attractive. If you look at the man on the left, he's bald, kind of similar in some ways, but his face is very symmetrical. Most people look at him and say, that's much more attractive. Now, attraction is not something we learn. Even infants as young as 3 months old will pick out a more attractive face. And the way we know they think it's more attractive is they stare at it longer. If you look at the picture of the same man with just different facial structure in the bottom right corner of your screen, you'll notice that one man has very angular jaw and much slimmer features. The other man is a little softer. What do we generally think is attractive? Women generally think men with more angular features are more attractive. Now, we also look for features that are average. We tend to think somebody like Brad Pitt is extremely beautiful, Angelina Jolie, very beautiful people, unusually attractive. Actually, they're not unusually attractive. Unusual features are not attractive. What we find attractive is average features. Let's look a little bit more at what we consider attractive for men. A study was done where they showed women videotapes of men acting in either passive or aggressive ways. Now, the women, when they were asked to rate the sexual attractiveness of the men, predominantly picked the aggressive men. They didn't necessarily say they liked them better, they just found them more attractive. When they do studies of what kind of voices women find attractive, they find men with deep voices attractive. Part of that could be that a man with a D voice might have higher testosterone levels, is bigger, and might be able to protect the woman and her children better. It seems like a no-brainer, but they've studied the sense of humor of a person and whether that makes them more attractive to another person. And for sure, what they found is a person with a better sense of humor is also considered more attractive. An interesting study was done on rating the attractiveness of pictures of men. Women rated them from not very attractive to very attractive, so from 1 to 10 on their level of attractiveness. And they got a pretty good scale of how women thought these men looked just based on picture alone. Then they did the same pictures, but instead they added a different component, and that component was how much money the man made. So they had a little vignette about the man, and they included, for the men who were considered highly attractive just based on physical features, they added a little feature that the man made $20,000 a year. Women started rating him much less attractive. So he might have been a 9 just based on his looks, but when you added that component that when he made $20,000 a year, now all of a sudden he dropped down to maybe a 6. They also looked at men who originally might have been a 4, very unattractive, and added a little feature that they were making $350,000 a year. Now those women rated that man as much more attractive. Oh, he might even be an 8 now, just because of the money that he makes. And it's not that women are gold diggers. It's just that a man with more wealth can be more protective and a better provider. What about women? What is the female ideal according to psychological research? Whereas a man, we should see sharp, angular features. For a woman, we like soft features. Neoteny is a term that means a person's face looks younger, cuter, just like a baby. When you see a baby, you want to stare at the baby because it's so cute. Well, that's neoteny, a juvenile type feature. We value that same type of look in most women. And again, we look for women with average features. We don't look for a woman that has super strikingly unusual features. It's a woman who is more average. When we look at the body, research has shown that the most attractive body shape is a woman who has a waist-to-hip ratio of 0.7. What that means, as an example, if a woman has a 35-inch hip circumference, their waist should be around 25 inches to give us that 0.7 ratio. Again, those things are part of the good gene theory. That's a woman who can bear children more successfully. They did an interesting study in a college classroom that demonstrated what we call the mere exposure effect. They rated the attractiveness of women at the end of the semester. The only thing is these women came into class. There were 4 different women. All had been rated as equally attractive. One woman never showed up for class. One woman came to 5 classes. One woman came to 10 classes. And one of the women came for 15 classes. At the end of the semester, they had the students in this large lecture class rate the attractiveness of a group of women. In this group of women, they had the pictures of these 4 women who had come to class as students varying amounts of time. What they found is the woman who showed up the most was rated as most attractive by the people in the class. So mere exposure has strong effects on attraction. Walker and Voll did a study where they looked at how attractive do we find pictures of people when it's a single picture versus that same picture in a group. And what the majority of people thought, person in a group was more attractive than that same person when they were just by themselves. Now you can look at this picture. You can see the woman at the top. Rate her on her attractiveness from 0 to 10. Now, not keeping in mind that it's the same picture, but just look at her in the group of 3 and rate her. Most people will rate her as more attractive in the group. Now, we rate people as more attractive in a group because we average out the rating of those people. So any person in the group tends to be rated as more towards the average for the group. Sometimes women and men think it'd be great to go out with a group of people who are much uglier than them. Well, that's not necessarily a good thing, because when we rate anybody in the group, we rate them towards the average. So if you hang out with a bunch of ugly people, you're going to be rated as more ugly. If you hang out with a bunch of very attractive people, then their attractiveness ratings will help pull you up, and you'll be rated as more attractive. Body language is also another interesting thing that's been researched by psychologists. I want to talk about two things in this lecture. One is posture mirroring. If you look at the pictures of President Obama, he is demonstrating posture mirroring. So both men are mimicking each other's gestures, not consciously. It's just that that's what we do when we're with somebody that we're trying to impress. The same thing happens in a dating relationship or when we first meet somebody. We tend to mirror their posture. Similar to that is the concept of movement echo. You see the couple sharing a glass of wine. Notice when we're watching couples, when one couple picks up a glass to drink, the other couple will soon pick up a glass to drink. When one person picks up their fork, the other one will soon pick up their fork. So we tend to echo the other person's movement. This is actually also a sign that we have a close relationship. When we're looking at a married couple, for instance, if they're out eating and they have a lot of movement echo, they tend to be very close. If they no longer have movement echo, the relationship is probably not going to last much longer. An interesting study that we will look at in more detail as we read the actual research study is the Rickety Bridge study. Dutton and Aaron are psychologists in Canada, and they wanted to study if physiologic arousal, and by physiologic arousal I mean increased heart rate, fear, anxiety, those kind of things, would increase sexual attraction for somebody that happened to be near you at the time that you had that physiologic arousal. What they did is they went to the Capilano Suspension Bridge. You can see a picture of the Capilano Suspension Bridge here in the picture. It's a high bridge, it's a swinging bridge. Most people feel a little bit anxious walking over that bridge because it's so narrow and so shaky. They also have a control bridge. The control bridge was a solid bridge over the same river downstream. In this study, they had an experimenter, the interviewer, stop single men on these bridges. And when they stopped them, they asked them to participate in a research study on the environment. It really wasn't a study on the environment, it was a study on sexual attraction. They tested for attraction and sexual arousal by using two different methods. One was a test called the thematic apperception test. And we're going to look at thematic apperception test when we look at what's called projective test. It's kind of a vague picture that we can put a lot of our own personality and feelings into the picture. So the researcher, after she got done having them fill out the questionnaire about the environment, which was a ruse, and had them write a short story about what was going on with this woman. This was later rated for sexual imagery. They assumed that the more sexual imagery that they had related to this thematic apperception test, the more sexually aroused and attracted the person was to the researcher. After that, they also, at the end of the study, the researcher wrote down his or her number on a slip of paper and gave it to the subject and said, if you want to know more about this experiment, give me a call later this afternoon. I said, I don't have time right now because I'm in the middle of this project, but if you want to know more, feel free to call me. Here are the results for that bridge study. The interviewer was either female or male. The control bridge was the low bridge. It was very safe. The experimental bridge was the rickety bridge, the Capilano Suspension Bridge. So when a female stopped a male walking across the control bridge, what happened? Well, only 2 out of 16 of those men phoned them afterwards. If they were walking across the experimental bridge, 9 of 18 of those men phoned to find out more about the female in the study afterwards. Again, a statistically significant difference. And we'll talk about what statistically significant means, because it means something very special in research. If we look at the number of people phoning the interviewer, if it was a male interviewer, on the control bridge, only 1 person called. On the experimental bridge, only 2 people called. Now let's look at sexual imagery. When a female stopped a man, the sexual imagery for the men who walked across the experimental bridge was rated 2.47. This is out of a range of 0, not sexual at all, to a rate of 5, which means very sexual. So a rating of 1 would be, I would like to date somebody. Rating of 2 would be some mention of kissing, all the way up to 5, which would be sexual intercourse. So some moderate sexual imagery here. We're talking kissing kind of thing, or more. On the control bridge, the sexual imagery score was 1.41, so much less sexual imagery on the control bridge. Now I want to call attention to the p-value in this chart. P less than 0.01. That's something that we want to look at on all of our studies, because that shows that the difference between 1.41 and 2.47, even though it seems very small, is statistically significant. That means the probability, which is the p factor, the probability that that happened by just chance was very, very low. So less than 0.01% chance that that difference occurred by chance. So that means that difference occurred because of something going on in this experiment. Again, if we look at the male interviewer with male subjects, the sexual imagery score in both cases, control and experimental, were both very low. NS means it was not significantly different. Even though experimental bridge had slightly more sexual imagery, that difference was so small as not to be significant. How should we understand these results? The researchers explain these results by a term called misattribution of arousal. So misattribution means we are attributing our arousal to something besides the scary suspension bridge. So these men attributed the fact that they were physiologically aroused to the fact that they thought the woman was more attractive. We can use that when we go out on dates. What would be a great date to make a woman or a man be more physiologically aroused and maybe even more attracted to us? Maybe bungee jumping, taking him out for coffee and giving him something with caffeine, or maybe taking him to a scary movie or even a funny movie. All those things increase our physiologic arousal. And if you happen to be with that person, they can put those feelings off on you as the one causing those feelings. A very similar concept is excitation transfer. Another study that looked at physiologic arousal and its effect on sexual attraction was the roller coaster study. Meston and Froelich reported on this in an article they called Love at First Fright. They went to Six Flags in Texas, and they had people getting ready to go on a roller coaster ride, or people who had just gotten off a roller coaster ride, and showed them pictures of people of the opposite sex and had them rate their level of attractiveness. They also asked them questions such as, would you go out to the cinema with this person if I was asked to, and I would like to kiss this person? What they found is the subjects rated the pictures as much more attractive after the roller coaster ride than they did before the roller coaster ride. They also were much more likely to want to date that person after the roller coaster ride than before. An interesting take on the excitation transfer concept was done by Edward Hitt at the end of Indiana University. It's well known that fans after a winning game tend to have higher testosterone levels, and fans after a losing game tend to have lower testosterone levels. So Edward Hurt was trying to figure out if this would affect a person's self-confidence after a game. So what he did, he showed fans pictures of very attractive people, people who are probably way above their normal level of dating material. If he showed these attractive people the people after their team had won a game, they rated themselves as much more likely to be able to get a date with them. So just sitting at a basketball game or some other sports event when your team wins, testosterone level goes up for both men and women, and the subject is much more optimistic about their sex appeal after a victory. I want to end this lecture by a quote from Shakespeare: "Truth, reason, and love keep little company together."